Hi, welcome to Transitions. I'm your host, Antoinette Zloty. Today I have a very special guest for you all to meet at home. Thank you for joining us. And her name is Sandra Wallace. Sandra is a psychiatric nurse and a coach in the area of obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, and depression. So today we're going to talk about these areas and some of the ways that she has been meeting the needs of people in our communities. So nice that you could make it here today on Transitions,
Thank you,
Sandra.
Thank you.
Okay, so Sandra, could you tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got into the area that you're in?
Sure. As someone living with OCD, anxiety, and depression all my life, in 1995 I was officially diagnosed with OCD, and during times of adversity, when COVID struck, I decided to offer free 50-minute discovery clarity calls for people that may have OCD, anxiety, and or depression. And I've never looked back. I've been doing that ever since 2020.
So where in that time then you left your actual clinical nursing in an institutional setting?
I left officially in December of 2021 to go internationally as an OCD, anxiety, and depression coach, because I felt the need was very strong and I wasn't able to practice my scope of nursing as a psych nursing outside of Manitoba and BC. So I couldn't work with people an hour and a half away in Kenora, Ontario, or in the States or in other countries. So now I have no geographical boundaries, so it's beautiful. I can meet with individuals, families, anywhere in the world because there's no limits. I also do a lot of international speaking and working with families that live with someone that has OCD, anxiety, and or depression.
So when you're on an individual practitioner basis with people, then your referrals would come primarily from word of mouth, or what was how else would people hear about you?
Yeah, sometimes word of mouth, sometimes other professionals will refer me to someone or refer them to me. And also, I'm also on Psychology Today, which is another counseling service across Canada that people can find me, and also just through Google search. A lot of people come across my information.
Well, that's really good. So do you find yourself the transition from in a clinical setting where you were in with other psychiatric nurses, attending to individual people face to face, did you find that a hard transition to what you're doing now, where it's your practice and you basically get to determine more of what's happening?
Actually, no, it was very inviting, because as a psych nurse working on the ward, your time is limited and you can't do the work that I can do as a working one-on-one or as a group coach. I also do group coaching where there's one-to-many, so myself as a coach and many people coming to me and working through things and inspiring one another through group coaching. So it's actually much nicer and much more straightforward, because I'm able to work with them and build those therapeutic relationships on a one-to-one or coaching. And the nice thing about it is when we're doing the coaching as a group or one-to-one, I'm able to make a specific tailor-made program for each person. So it's not a cookie-cutter system where everyone does the same things. It's all based on your needs, and we build that solid foundation, and we get out all the different types of obsessions and list them, and then the compulsion that's associated with the obsession, and then we start facing those fears slowly and gradually over time to get to the more anxiety-provoking ones.
So I mean, I am not as familiar with OCD. However, maybe there are some people at home might be interested in knowing a little bit about the causation, the age groups that are affected, if it affects one gender or the other. Could you comment on that?
Sure, I'd love to. Great question. So OCD is usually diagnosed late teen to early adulthood. Women are more likely to develop OCD than men. And also, but I always caution when I say that, because statistics are gathered in a way that if certain people do not seek professional help in some realms, those statistics aren't matched up or accounted for. So the numbers can be quite a bit higher when it comes to diagnosing. So, and others live in quiet desperation their whole life without being diagnosed. I worked with an individual that lived 5 decades with social anxiety and didn't even know it until he was properly diagnosed. Men aren't so forthcoming with getting help because they are men and they feel they need to be stronger in some ways, but I always say real strength comes with reaching out. That's showing your strength, your inner strength. So there's also a lot of vulnerability and shame and guilt associated with OCD, as well as anxiety and depression. So people will sometimes refrain from seeking the help they need. So now OCD can develop early in childhood as well. That's when I was diagnosed. I was probably, looking back, I had OCD since I was 3 or 4, as well as anxiety and depression off and on throughout my life. So, but yeah, it can happen at any time. It can happen due to environmental stress. It can happen because of trauma. And I always say trauma hides. Trauma does not, it's not a visible symptom or sign. A lot of times when we're hurt physically, we have a broken arm, we can say, what happened? Antoinette, you have a broken arm. What happened? But when it's up here in our mind, we tend to dismiss it or pretend that it doesn't exist. Yeah.
That's so true. Yes, definitely. And I think that things have changed from the past, don't you think?
Oh,
where there has been a lot more openness with others, that, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. I mean, you're a prime example, because many, many years ago, there'd be people who might be working in the area of mental health, but not actually let other people know about their own diagnoses and so on. So, you know, I must thank you for sharing that and sharing it here on Transitions.
And I think that I want to share, and I share my story, and I'll spend the rest of my, excuse me, my life sharing, because, excuse me, I feel that people live in the quietness of it all, and they're not able to get the help or know where to get the help. And so by reaching out and doing shows like yours, it helps to reach the greater audience that they may be sitting at home thinking, maybe I have OCD, maybe I don't. But the first step is early detection. And I always say knowledge is potential power. It's what we do with the knowledge that's a game changer after we're diagnosed.
And for people who are not yet diagnosed or who haven't had children yet, because one of their kids could potentially, you know, develop OCD, it's and anxiety and depression. It's good for them to know ahead, isn't it?
Yes, because there's a genetic predisposition as well. That's not to say if your parents are depressed or have OCD or have anxiety disorders that they are going to automatically develop it, but they're more prone to have it. So we got to watch for those signs and symptoms. And the difference distinguishing between a sign and a symptom is a sign something you can see, whereas a symptom's more inward. I may have to ask the hard questions to yourself, Antoinette, to find out if that's in fact what you're living with. And I think for a lot of practitioners, this is what I find when people come to me. I get a lot of complex cases because they've seen 2 or 3 different professionals, and they come to me and people aren't even properly diagnosed. So therefore they get on the wrong treatment, the wrong interventions. So it's important as a practitioner, as a coach, as a therapist, whatever realm you're in, to ask the important questions to draw that out of people. Because I know when I was diagnosed, I used to go walk-in clinic, and I could not get a name for it. All my skin was falling off, and I was red and raw, emaciated up to my elbows. I would wash for hours. And the doctors would all look at me and say, you know what, you need help. And I'd say to them, I know I need help, but I don't know what, that's why I'm here. Mm-hmm. But nobody could help me till the fall of 1995, when I luckily came across Dr. Vivian Rowan, who lives and is an expert in the field of OCD, and she was able to put those pieces together.
So did you meet her in a clinical setting, or did you meet her through going online? Because a lot of people do that now, eh?
Yes.
They check online for information as well.
But not, back then I did not. I came across her because I went to Dr. Morrison, a walk-in clinic in the North End where I was raised, and she said, I think you may have OCD. She wasn't quite sure, but she said, I'm going to refer you to a lady who specializes it. And I myself have had to get special education on it for 14 years. I trained under Dr. Rowan's pioneers that founded the clinics in the States and became more knowledgeable in OCD.
I know there'd be people at home that would be thinking about cost. I mean, we do have a system here, of course, in Manitoba and in Canada, where a lot of interventions are covered under Medicare. So is your practice entirely private then, and it's contracted with an individual, and then you go forward with that, laying out what would be expected in terms of financial contributions that they have to make towards the therapy?
Yeah, and that's a touchy subject in the sense that it's always been. Certain insurance companies will cover certain credentials. So sometimes for some people you need to have a doctorate degree. I don't have a doctorate degree. I have both personal and professional experience totaling between my psych nursing and my personal, 70 some, almost 80 years of experience. So some of the insurance companies will cover it, but a lot of them don't. And now there's more companies doing a expenditure account, a health expenditure account, where you can allocate that $500 or $1,000 or whatever it might be, sometimes $3,000 towards whatever it is you want that you consider helpful in your mental health field. So sometimes people will have coverage that way, but I always tell people, look into it. It's so individual. I don't want to mislead people, but I also say that if you ever want to invest in yourself, and that's the beauty with my programs, I take them from point A to B a lot quicker than if they just did it gradually through a different insurance company or someone that wasn't an expert. And I always tell people, make sure whoever you work with, whether it's myself or someone else, do your due diligence, ask the right questions, ask them if they treat OCD and what the treatment modality is. Because talk therapy does not work for OCD. We need to challenge the fears, which is the therapy called...
Yeah, I wanted you to comment on or enlighten us about cognitive behavior therapy, because we hear that a lot. And yeah, so you use that in your practice.
Absolutely. That's what helped me, and I did a very intense form of it, which I've never had. I've created 10 different programs based on people's needs and based on things that weren't there when I had struggled with it. So I can say I'm 100% free now of my OCD for the most part. And what I do is there's a gold standard treatment called cognitive behavior therapy that was founded in the 70s that still is #1 today. And within that therapy is a technique called ERP, exposure response prevention. And so what I do is I take 1 to 2 sessions where I get a really good snapshot of a person's history. Because it's interesting, people may say, you know, why are you asking me questions about my history? But sometimes history repeats itself, and we need to know, I need to have a really good grasp on where you're coming from, when your symptoms started, how long you've had them, what you're doing to alleviate your anxiety. And so CBT is by far the greatest therapy. Now there's also another therapy called ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, which I bring into CBT, but it does not substitute CBT. So depending on the individual's needs, I'll bring that in. But we make a tailor-made program, and then we start challenging the obsessions. Because the interesting thing with OCD is it's not so much the thought that we have to deal with, which people think, oh my gosh, what do you mean it's not the thought? Because obsessions are unwanted, intrusive thoughts and urges and impulses. And so more so, not so much the thought, but the emotion brought on by the thought. That's number one. So in my book, and when I'm doing international speaking, I talk a lot about that.
That is a book that earned you a #1 bestseller. What year did you publish?
This book has been out for a couple years now. This is a very small book, as you can see. It's called Stop Obsessing, Start Overcoming OCD Leaves Clues. And this book, the whole intent was just a quick read for people so that they could understand what CBT is and that there is hope for people living with obsessive compulsive disorder. And in this book, I also talk about a clock. And I'm a visual learner, and a lot of people are. So whether it be obsessions or whether it be anxiety disorders, the obsession always starts, or the anxiety-provoking thought always starts at the 12 o'clock position. And eventually it goes to the 3 o'clock. The needle will drop to the 3, and we feel compelled to alleviate the anxiety. And then at the 6 o'clock position, we do a compulsion for the obsession, which is an outward or inward mental act or behavior to bring down. The whole idea is to bring down the anxiety. So the needle will go to the 9. The anxiety drops somewhat. Sometimes it's significant, sometimes it's not. And then what I teach people to realize, though, is the clock will always strike 12 again. So what I teach is between the 12 and the 3 to get people out of that vicious cycle with their anxiety or with their obsessions so that we can start seeing things more objectively. Because a lot of times it's hard to see the picture when you're in the frame. And so with the second book, this is I'm passionate about this book, OCD Obsessions, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, and the subtitle is 6 Secrets to the Deliverance from OCD. And I wanted it to be spiritual in some way because I wanted to include the word deliverance. But this is my journey living with OCD and anxiety and depression, and it's got some really good points on living your life on purpose with freedom from them. So, and that's available on Amazon all over the world.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Sandra, what about your own support system? Because, I mean, there are people who would be saying, gee, I wish that I could have turned what was causing me to maybe not do some of the things that I would have liked to do. I'd like to have turned my life around like you. So what would you say have been your strongest supporters in your journey?
A great question. My biggest supporters was my faith. My biggest supporter was my mama. My mama didn't understand the OCD or the anxiety or the depression, but she always supported me in the best way she could. And it's not up to our family and friends to get it, fully get it. They can support us, but I think what's more important is for them to be educated on it. So I spend a lot of time in all my programs. I educate the family members because I feel if I only treat the individual and not the family or friends that are supporting them, then I'm only doing half my job. Because we often as family members will do what we call enabler, be an enabler.
Yeah.
So if I don't check the stove, I may get you to check the stove on the way out of the house. And I remember there was many times I had this compelling feeling to check the stove, and I knew I couldn't do it, so I get my husband to do it. So what we're doing is we're just enabling people to do our own our compulsions for us. And that's a real no-no, but it's hard when you see your loved one crying and in so much anxiety over it. So what I do is I teach people not to enable, but rather disable. So that in the short term it feels good to do for the person, but in the long term it causes more OCD.
So just coming back to your support system, were there people who even said to you, are you leaving your clinical practice to set that up? That gave you some doubts about what you were venturing. And talking about your story as opposed to what happens to people with OCD.
Yes.
Did you have some people like that who were really cautioning you?
Yes, I had a lot of naysayers. A lot of people say you've been a psych nurse for almost 30 years, you've got a pension, you've got all that. I was willing to give all that away if I could help one person. And I'm still to this day willing and willing to be able to help whoever it is in need. So designing these programs has helped a lot of people, and the testimonies. And I think that it's important that if you believe in something strongly, you don't look back. I remember when I started the coaching virtually during COVID, I remember thinking, I can't go back to my old ways of washing, and I knew I could spiral quickly. So I was willing to risk dying for COVID, because of COVID, than going back to my old ways, because it was just so painful. And it was a lot of anxiety. And I remember those anxiety moments when I couldn't even leave my apartment to go down one flight of stairs to check my mail, because I had such tremendous anxiety. So.
If you were to say to someone, okay, this would be a good path for you to follow in terms of dealing with that, what would be like two main things that you would say to them, like in terms of going forward, if they're out there and they're all by themselves and coping with that?
Right. Well, the thought action fusion, that's one of the first things I tell people.
Thought
action
fusion.
So just because you have the thought, so for example, me being worried about hitting someone, it's called hit and run. There's many flavors of OCD, but hit and run OCD, if you think of it as a magnetic force, on the right side you have the thought, and the left side of the magnet is the action. So just because I think I hit someone doesn't mean I did. But in our OCD minds, we think the thought means automatically that we did the action. So did I hit someone? Yes, I did. So what I do as a coach is I help bridge that gap, or separate that gap wider and wider, so these magnetic forces can't come together. So the thought is, did I hit someone? And through coaching and CBT and ERP, and very important piece is challenging our faulty belief systems, because that's what's happening in our mind. This gap gets wider and wider. No matter what, we can't bring those two magnetic forces together anymore, because we've coached and learned the skills, the life skills and the mental skills to keep those two things separate, and therefore the person can start living their life as they deserve to be able to.
So I'm just coming back to sort of a kind of like more along the line of access, because there are people who don't have insurance. There are people who don't have income to support private, and I must say it's really good that there is an option for people to actually shop for the therapy that they need. It's good that we've been moving in that direction. But for, say, a kid in school right now who's afraid to go to school because they might be laughed at or so on, would you have some suggestions, say, in the educational system for more education about health? Because I remember health in the years that I actually was a part of the school system. I was not taught a lot of things in the mental health area, right? you know, we did spend some time on health, but, you know, so do you see incorporating information about mental health so that we can, at a very young age, start to appreciate and understand what people are going through, and not be laughing at an individual because they're anxious or because they're depressed or because they have OCD.
Well, I think just doing what we're doing here, educating people, making people aware of it. In my line of work, through my website, people can read www.theocdcoach.com. We have a lot of blogs and podcasts that are done on many different topics, from anorexia to bullying to all kinds of different things. So education is key, dialing into support groups sometimes online or in person, and going to reputable sources, because people that a lot of my clients, they Google and search for hours endlessly. And I always say, if you search long enough, you're going to find what you want or you're going to find what you don't want. But they spend most of their waking hours searching. But what are we searching for? We have to be very intentional with what we're searching for. So spending that time searching for support for that particular issue, yeah. And the school systems too are getting better at integrating counselors and getting topics. I do a lot of free education through my website and my closed Facebook group. So that's another way to do it. But going to the source that's reputable to get your answers, yeah.
Well, actually, I was part of a major mental health promotion project, and we came up with a toolkit that is geared towards helping people to understand a wide expanse of mental health, and it's actually on bawpg.ca, which is the website for the Barbados Association.
Excellent. And the thing that you talk about with toolkits, each person, each client I have, we develop a toolkit so that they can pull out the tools, the coping strategies. And I always say practice the coping strategies in the comfort of your home. I have a section, chapter in my second book here, OCD, where they can bring out the tools. And the important thing is to practice those tools in the comfort of your home first on a regular basis. So when you're out in the community and you're having a panic attack or you're having a fear of an obsession, you can draw on those coping strategies and they come second nature.
Well, you know, I really have learned a lot today, and I really feel very happy that there are people like you, Sandra, who are out there supporting others who have found themselves with these conditions. So what I'd like to do is to thank you again for being here, and also thank our guests at home for joining us, and to encourage them to go on YouTube and check us out there, and hopefully follow up if you have some information that you'd like to find out. You've got some good suggestions here from Sandra. So it's entirely up to you, and I really am thankful that you could join us. So bye for now, and thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for
Sandra.
having me.